Right, everybody. Is the webcast working? Yeah, great. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome all members of the public, councillors, parish representatives and officers to the Planning Committee. This meeting is being streamed live and capable of repeated viewing. If you're seated in the public area of the council chamber, it is likely that your image will be captured by the recording cameras and result in your image becoming part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human rights, and if you wish to avoid this, you should leave the public seated area of the council chamber and move to the upper public gallery. Could I ask everyone to note the fire safety instruction that on hearing the alarm you should leave the building by the nearest marked exit and congregate at the assembly point, which is in the car park outside, and please switch your electronic devices being used to silent. My name is Councillor Philip Minor and I am the Chair. On my left is the Vice Chair, Councillor Martin Cuthbert. The co-opted parish councils are situated along the second row of benches. Members of the Planning Committee sit on the front row of benches, and only those councillors who are members of the Planning Committee are entitled to vote. For clarity, as we go through the agenda this evening, members of the committee will be permitted to speak for up to 5 minutes on each item. Any other members and parish councillors will be permitted a maximum of 3 minutes to speak with permission from the Chair. May I remind members to declare any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests and the nature of the interest at the beginning of the agenda item. Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Sorry. And that turns over the page. On declaring a pecuniary interest, you are required to leave the meeting when that item of business is considered. There should be no interaction from the public areas at any time during the meeting. Members of the public invited to speak on tonight's applications will only be permitted to speak for 3 minutes if they have indicated to do so in advance as a representative or as an applicant agent on specific applications. Requests to speak should have been received by the clerk by yesterday at 4 o'clock. In the event of a disturbance, such as a calling out from the public area during the meeting, a request from the Chair to be quiet will be given, but if the problem persists, any persons interrupting the meeting will be asked to leave. If necessary, the meeting will be adjourned to allow this to take place. Right, we'll just go through a couple of things, and then there's an LDP thing I'm going to read out. So, first of all, we have agenda item number 1, and this is apologies for absence. Mrs. Zoe Borman, have any apologies been received?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received this evening.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, we have declarations of interest. Are there any interests to be considered tonight? Councillor N. Cuthbert.
Thank you. It's regarding the Priest Lane application, and I've taken advice from officers, and because I live in the proximity of the development, I will not take part in the debate and vote. However, I would like to speak as a ward councillor if you agree, Chair.
Yes, certainly, that will be allowed. Right, so agenda item number 3 is the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee on the 13th of January this year. Are the minutes to that Planning Committee agreed? Agreed? Right. Right. The committee will now determine the planning applications and matters before it. Before we begin, may I just remind those members of the public who will be addressing the committee on planning applications tonight that your speech should be no longer than 3 minutes in duration and should relate purely to planning matters. When your name is called, will you please make your way to the chair provided. When you have completed your speech, the committee will debate the application and reach a decision. Now, two things. First of all, there's an information item for the committee. The council has received a prior notification application reference 25/01433/DEM for the demolition of a wooden pavilion. The building is the former Hutton FC facilities. The application is not a planning application and therefore is not one that is required to come to planning committee. We are informing you of the application as it concerns council land. If there are any questions or queries regarding this application, please contact brook.pride@brentwood.gov.uk by Friday the 13th of February. which is the end of this week. There's also some wording here on the LDP, which I'll just read out. So, some members of this council did not vote in favour of adopting the Brentwood Local Development Plan in March 2022 or were not members of the council at that time. I know some hold concerns about development allocations within the plan. The plan was adopted by the council, so it is the council's plan. But although no local development plan technically belongs to any one administration, it needs to be borne in mind that this one was drawn up under and adopted by a prior administration. And furthermore, that it is members of the current administration who are on record as having expressed concerns with aspects of it. Nonetheless, the Planning Committee is tasked with considering all applications against policies within the Council's local development plan, and we will do so on their merits. Right. So, that all brings us to item 4, and item 4 is land at Priest Lane, Brentwood. And this application is for the demolition of the existing pavilion and the construction of 97 dwellings, including access, car parking, cycle and bin storage, public open space, landscaping and associated works. This is application number 25/01147/FUL. The officer recommendation is for approval and the case officer is Ms Fiona Dunning. Ms Dunning.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to point out to members that there are papers at the end of the report, and it includes the addendum report addressing affordable housing and the inspector's decisions on the previous application and the costs decision. The addendum report addresses the affordable housing proposed, and the date the guidance note was published has been confirmed as March 2025, not May 2025, as stated in the addendum. Other updates to the report include the following. Section 5 of the report discusses the schools and education comments. There's some amendment to the amount that they have stated in a superseded letter, and that amount is £99,989, and that's for 4.89 places. So that would also amend the draft Section 106 heads of terms on page at the end of the report. At paragraph 6.39, the number of new trees proposed isn't 115 as stated. It is in fact 145 trees. Since the publishing of the report, one objection has been received by a neighbour in relation to traffic on Priest Lane and the lack of pavement, and this has already been addressed in the report, so there's no additional comments or conditions proposed in regard to that. 2 other objections have been received from neighbours. One of those is from number 2 Bishop's Walk, and they were concerned about the loss of privacy in relation to the damage to the white bean tree that is on the landscape plan as proposed to be retained. It's still proposed to be retained, but the damage that was caused to it during a storm and it being required to be pruned means that it has less of a canopy, and it also may need to be removed at some stage. So it's proposed to include a new tree as part of a condition, and I'll address that later in this presentation. In addition, they were concerned, the neighbours were concerned about the window on plot 95, a side first floor window which is to a bathroom, and the plans have been amended so that that window is obscurely glazed, and that's shown on the plans. The Landscape and Ecology Officer has suggested that a new tree be planted close to the white beam so that in the future, if it is to be removed or it's so diseased that it falls down, then there'll be a replacement tree growing to overcome that loss. The other letter received was, sorry, I should mention that these two letters weren't submitted as an objection to the application. They were submitted to the councillors. So the other one was from Priest Lane Neighbourhood Residents Association, who requested that the road network infrastructure improvements for a quiet cycle routes and bus stops and public transport improvements not be proposed as prior to occupation conditions as stated in the Highways Authority comments. The bus stop is proposed to be as a condition of the planning application, but the other two matters are in the draft section 106, and they're for monetary contributions towards larger projects that are set out in the infrastructure delivery plan that's available to view online. These contributions are pooled together with other allocated site contributions so that they aim to achieve the project value. So it's, while the money will be received prior to occupation, it doesn't necessarily mean that the project will be provided at that time. It depends on what other developments come forward and the contributions from those. And that's Essex Highways project. Housing has also submitted a statement today endorsing ARC's recommendation. Minor changes to the proposed conditions include accommodation schedule is revision E, not C. Plot 7 is to be wheelchair adaptable. That's M43A, that's set out in condition 28 and stated in paragraph 1.26 of the report. And as I mentioned before, condition 27, which is a landscaping condition, it's proposed to have that amended so it includes a new tree adjacent to the white beam between plot 95 and number 2 Bishop's Walk. So most of the members of this committee would be familiar with the site. This is, I think, the third time it's come to committee. It's part of the R19 allocated site, and apart from plot 7, which is in the northeastern corner of the site, the planning inspector on non-determination appeal accepted that 97 dwellings was complying with policy R19. The existing access track of Priest Lane is at a higher level than Priest Lane pavement, and so the proposed access is required to have some excavation, and the photos you can see slightly on the left-hand side, the existing access is slightly raised. You come up a little bit, it's about half a metre. And then you see here, this middle photograph shows the T23 tree, which is proposed to be removed, overhanging the entire site, more or less. And you'll see on the left-hand side of the tree, there's not many branches, which indicates that all of the roots are on the side of the site. And in fact, the landscape and ecology officer, when the developer was undertaking works along Priest Lane, went to visit the site and saw that the roots of the tree were severed adjacent to Priest Lane, so that it's quite a sensitive area, and the excavation of the new access way means that the tree would need to be removed. And it's, I've discussed it in the report that the planning inspector accepted that the tree would be removed. And at the planning appeal, the two highways experts agreed that the highways requirements and highway safety were acceptable. And while members and objectors may not agree with the inspector's decision, it is a material consideration, and a no-dig solution is not possible, and the Highways Authority have not objected to the application on highways grounds. This slide shows some photographs of the site. The top slide shows the house on the top left is number 24, St Andrews Walk, and St Andrews Place. And this was the property that the inspector was concerned about in their decision of the previous planning application. They were concerned with the overlooking of the garden of this property, even though their adjoining neighbour overlooks. The inspector considered that there was too much impact on their amenity, and that is the reason the appeal was dismissed. The next photo shows number 2, Bishop's Walk, which I mentioned early in the introduction, and you see the tree, the white beam tree, during a summer period. And then the photo that I took on Saturday shows the tree in winter, but you can see that it's quite damaged, maybe not from that photo, but it was in fairly poor condition when we saw it on Saturday. And then the bottom photograph shows the adjoining Endeavour School, which has an extension, a build, and it was part of the development site, the R19 site. The next slide shows some trees to be removed, outlined in red, and then you see the slide on the right-hand side shows the distance between the dwelling at number 2, and the adjoining property is 26 metres, and there's obscure glazing. And then it's T14 is the tree that is the white beam. The inspector discussed the amenity of adjoining residents in their decision, and I've put a quote of the inspector's decision in relation to the adjoining properties. The inspector was satisfied that, apart from plot 7, that the amenity of residents was satisfactory with the application proposed. Once again, the inspector was satisfied with the number of houses proposed and the layout. They considered that while the scheme was different, it didn't significantly impact on the adjoining neighbours. I mentioned Section 106 before. I also wanted to highlight the Section 106, the draft Section 106 requires 35% affordable housing, and there is a clause in the draft which requires the affordable housing scheme to be submitted and agreed prior to the development commencing. The housing team would review its needs at the time and determine whether the mix was suitable. There is a requirement for the developer to seek a registered provider for the affordable homes. However, if they are not successful, then the Section 106 allows them to make a monetary contribution rather than provide the affordable homes on site. The parking spaces are less than the parking guidance for the affordable homes, for the 2-bedroom flats, and the reason for this being acceptable is that car ownership of affordable housing is typically much lower than for market housing, and the Highway Authority have made comments on this, and they're satisfied that the amount of car parking on site is satisfactory. Highways have also stated that the trip rates are accepted and are an estimate based on the similar site in Hitchin. It is based on a best estimate, and the Highway Authority have no evidence to dispute the assessment. In regard to the bus stops on Priest Lane, the passenger transport team of Essex will undertake an assessment of the best locations of the bus stops at the time. And then I just have some elevations to show you. The top one, which shows the proposed bungalow on plot 7, and then the other two-storey dwellings facing Bishop's Walk. And then some more elevations. This is facing towards Priest Lane. This proposes the landscape plan. It's the same as previously presented to this committee on the previous applications. The only difference is the plot 7, and and then the left-hand slide shows more details of the tree planting. There is, as I mentioned, there is a proposed condition or an additional condition sentence for condition 27 in relation to the tree adjacent to the white beam. There's also a proposed condition for boundary treatment. While the boundary treatments, there is a boundary treatment plan shown, the condition will allow further details to be provided, including elevation details. In summary, the appeal was dismissed due to the impacts on the occupiers of number 24 St Andrew's Place. The proposed bungalow avoids these impacts. The strategic allocation site has 97 dwellings, and that was found to be acceptable at appeal. It's in a sustainable location, and the infrastructure improvements are set out in the report under Section 106 contributions. The highway safety satisfied that the proposal meets the NPPF, and this was discussed at appeal. 35% affordable housing includes 3 dwellings that are M43, with one of those is M43A, and that's the private dwelling. The mix proposed doesn't meet the guidance note, as pointed out in ARC's comments, but on balance, the proposal is supported. The cascades clause in the draft Section 106 may result in monetary contributions if not purchased by a registered provider, and there's steps that need to go through for that. Future access is provided adjoining the site south of Bishop's Walk in accordance with R19 policy. There's good open space provision with a leap and a walking circuit and gardens, part of the landscaping scheme. The compensation for the loss of the oak tree is the 6 extra heavy trees within the landscaped area. And the replacement field and playing pavilion are Section 106 contributions. So the application is recommended for approval subject to Section 106 and conditions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms Dunning. Right, so the first person to speak is Martin Skinner, who's an objector.
Thank you, Chair. The Planning Department's papers for this item do not provide a balanced view, and their recommendation for approving this application is in contravention of the NPPF and is not justified. Planning's recommendation for the last application was shown to be inappropriate and incorrect. This recommendation is also inappropriate and incorrect. Put simply, this application is not in line with policy R19 of the LDP regarding the number of dwellings and policy NE01 on protecting the environment. Planning says that the number of dwellings was intended to be flexible, but a 47% increase on the around 66 allocated to this portion of Site R19 is clearly not what was intended by the word around and is not reasonable. and more reasonable flexing would be plus or minus 10%. The Inspector of the Appeal did not accept or did not state, and I repeat, did not state, that the application is in line with policy R19, and I would call on the Planning Officer to withdraw her earlier comment. Paragraph 7 of the decision in particular states that the number of dwellings in the application is higher than anticipated, but there are also other references. It is therefore significant and telling that planning's papers for this meeting no longer state that the application is in line with policy R19 in contrast to their previous papers. Paragraph 12 of the NPPF states that where a planning application conflicts with an up-to-date development plan, permission should not usually be granted. Local planning authorities may take decisions that depart from an up-to-date development plan, but only if material considerations in a particular case indicate that a plan should not be followed. So it is not enough to show that a departure is possible. The Council must be satisfied there are compelling reasons to do so. There are no material considerations of sufficient weight that have been provided by the applicant, planning or the inspector as to why the Council should depart from the current allocation. While the appeal decision must be considered, the conclusion said the application would conflict with the LDP as a whole. There were no considerations, including the framework, of sufficient weight to indicate a decision should be taken otherwise. The applicant and planning would have us believe that this merely relates to issues around Plot 7 and that the appeal would have been successful without this. However, that cannot be concluded from the decision. The inspector outlines the benefits and harms of the 97 homes as a whole. To have relevance under paragraph 12, the points provided are required to provide material considerations of sufficient weight as to why it would be appropriate for the Council to depart from the 66 dwellings already included, i.e. considerations around incremental dwellings. Most of the benefits are included in the existing allocation, whilst the harms arise from exceeding it. The Residents' Association will discuss later the undoubted harms that arise due to the incremental number of dwellings and the breach of policy NE01. Note that the government guidance on planning states that, provided regard had to all material considerations, it is for the decision maker, i.e. this committee, to decide what weight is to be given to the material considerations in each case. I urge the committee to reject this application.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner. Right, so the next speaker is from the Priest Lane Residents Association, Kate Webster.
Thank you, Chair. The Residents' Association strongly objects to this application and fully agrees with Mr Skinner's analysis. The only real benefit identified is an increase in social housing, but this is an additional 8 units of small flats, and Brentwood is already well provided with flats. The appeal inspector did not address whether material considerations had been provided to ignore R19, because the failure of Plot 7 made that unnecessary. There are matters that irrefutably cause harm, and it cannot be concluded that there is an absence of harm caused by the extra number of dwellings. The access road has obstructed visibility, and the proximity to Glantham's Road creates an unsafe staggered junction that would not meet Essex Design Guide standards. Essex Highways assured us this junction was safety audited, but this audit missed the obstructions and didn't even look at Glantham's Road. Essex Highways' solution was to relax the safety standards. Manual for Streets suggests this relaxation is suitable where vehicles do not travel within a metre of the curb, but it is very clearly not the case here. The potential for traffic collisions is obvious. Increasing the number of dwellings will increase the traffic risk. The traffic concerns are already well known, except to Essex Highways, who think that 12 cars queuing is the worst case. And even in the traffic assessment, they indicated that the trip analysis numbers were underestimated. The traffic analysis for the LDP showed significant adverse effects, and it does not really seem reasonable to say that because traffic conditions are already bad, there is no harm in adding more traffic. There is undoubted harm. At busy times, traffic queues beyond this site access. At peak times, we expect that the traffic caused by this number of dwellings will have to queue for a considerable period of time, even to get out of the access road onto Priest Lane, and nearby residents already have this problem exiting their driveways. This will further increase the risk of traffic accidents. The appeal inspector is silent on the harm to biodiversity, merely saying that the application complied with the rules, despite the massive net loss on the site. However, providing money for a site in Cambridge can't be in line with Brentwood's biodiversity policies. The loss of in-town biodiversity, along with the loss of the heritage oak tree, is a direct and harmful consequence of the increased number of dwellings. Additionally, the applicant and planning have contravened policy NE01, which says that compensatory measures will only be considered if it is not possible to fully mitigate the impacts. But planning have previously said that on-site mitigation is not possible, but this is not credible. It is only not possible because they increase the number of dwellings on the LDP in order to do so. No reasonable person can say that no harm has been caused by increasing the number of units over the LDP number. The Planning Committee voted unanimously to reject this proposal, describing it as a bad scheme with significant problems, and nothing has really changed except for a small adjustment to Plot 7. I urge the committee to reject this application as an unjustified departure from the LDP and the negative impacts on material considerations arising from the additional number of dwellings, which are clearly harmful to the local area and the borough overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Webster. The next person to speak is Simon Hoskin from Carla Holmes.
Good evening, members, and thank you, Chair. As members will be aware, this site is allocated for residential development under Policy R19 of the Brentwood Local Plan. These proposals for 97 high-quality homes follow an appeal that was dismissed on one very specific point, that being unacceptable overlooking from Plot 7 towards 24 St Andrews Place. It was this specific point alone which was the only fault the appeal inspector found with the development. The sole issue has been addressed by redesigning Plot 7 as a bungalow, removing the potential for overlooking amenity entirely. The inspector concluded that the proposal was acceptable in all other respects, including density. Members previously raised concerns regarding the loss of the oak tree on Priest Lane. The inspector determined that the removal of this tree would be a consequence of the allocation and so would not justify refusal. The council's tree officer has confirmed that there are no alternative measures that would enable the tree to be retained. Effectively, a decision was made to lose the tree when the site was allocated, not when this planning application is determined. The inspector has awarded costs against council, concluding that their reasons for refusal were not supported by policy or evidence. Members are therefore not being asked to reconsider matters that have already been settled. Instead, they are being asked to determine a revised proposal that has addressed the sole issue of overlooking to 24 St Andrews Place. The benefits of the scheme are significant. The delivery of 34 much-needed affordable homes, over £5 million in SIL and Section 106 contributions, land for the expansion of Endeavour School, over 2 acres of community open space, the planting of 145 new trees, and low-carbon measures across the development, including air source heat pumps and EV charging points. The proposals will deliver 35% affordable housing and a 10-year split that is in accordance with local plan policy HPO 5. 2 of the affordable homes will meet the M43 wheelchair accessible requirements, with all the remaining homes being M42 compliant, again thus meeting policy HPO 1. The proposed affordable housing is supported by both the planning officer and the housing officer. Whilst a note from the council's affordable housing consultant ARC has raised comments regarding the affordable housing mix, this mix was considered both at the appeal and the previous committee meeting in which it was deemed acceptable. This is a highly material consideration. The case for granting planning permission is compelling. The proposals represent a sustainable and policy-compliant form of development that is supported by officers. The previously identified harm has been removed and there is no credible planning basis on which to refuse the application. If permission were to be refused or deferred, an appeal would be lodged and a further award of costs would be inevitable. We sincerely hope that the committee can support these proposals to enable the delivery of a high-quality residential scheme on an allocated site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hoskin. Right, so we have, I've got a couple of questions before the committee starts speaking, including Councillor Nikki Cuthbert, who obviously needs to speak and then leave. But we've got 2 ward councillors who are in attendance who aren't on the planning committee. So does either of you want to go first? Who wants to go first?
No, we said we would go alphabetically.
Alphabetical order for you as well.
Councillor
Okay.
Gordon can go first.
Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. To the start off by saying to the 134 residents who made comments, I'd like to thank them for making the time and effort. Of those expressing an opinion, 99.3% of local residents object to this application. The people objecting live on or near Priest Lane. They're the residents who use Priest Lane on a daily basis, residents who cannot pull off their drives because of too much traffic or are unable to walk on the narrow pavements because a car or van is parked too close by because of the excessively narrow road. On the subject of the road safety, I think it's been glossed over fairly quickly. At its narrowest point, Priest Lane is 4.45 metres wide. To put that into context, the width of many modern cars is 2.2 metres, up to 2.2 metres. Fire engines and ambulances can be up to 2.4 metres, so it's actually impossible to get 2 past at the same time. We've heard about bus stops. Now, this mystifies me. I'd love to know where it's going. Large stretches of Priest Lane, there is no pavement. So unless the plan's actually to put it on somebody's front garden, I really can't see it happening. And as for Essex County approving the bus routes, we haven't seen anything about that at the moment. We've already heard about tailbacks on Middleton Hall, from Middleton Hall Lane past the proposed entrance to the site. So if this site was built, you wouldn't actually have time to be able to actually get out of it. That's approximately 800 metres, and that would be adding more traffic to this road, and it's not going to help. Within the local plan, there is a policy that states developments must not have an unacceptable impact on the transport network in terms of highway safety, capacity and congestion. This development will have an unacceptable impact on all of those. Therefore, this application should be refused on that basis alone. We've heard about cycle routes. Now, it might be possible to cycle safely around the new housing estate. However, once they leave the estate and join Priest Lane, they'll be joining a narrow road which is wholly inadequate for frankly dangerous for cyclists. The other point, which I think has been raised already, is the effectively creating a staggered junction with Glantham's Road. Somebody uses that corner often. Turning out of Glantham's Road is already problematic and poor sight lines. Adding this new road will make this busy junction even more dangerous. One of the other factors of this field, I think Councillor Worsfold has mentioned in the past about the flooding and football. Certainly in the LDP, page 237, policy R19, land at Priest Lane, point 2, drainage. This point states the following: as the site is located within a critical drainage area, development should be minimised and mitigate surface water runoff in line with policy BE05, sustainable drainage. I do not believe that this has been fully addressed. Residents backing onto this site tell me parts of their gardens can be unusable at times with excessive amounts of water. Some residents at St Andrew's Place occasionally have standing water in their garages. Concreting over half of this field will make these problems worse. A previous speaker has already touched on the numbers. Now, the LDP, as I said, states 75. Policy R19 also includes the area known as Flemings, which is not included in this application. And this is indicated for 14 properties. Adding the two together, you actually get to a figure 111, which is a staggering 48% over the LDP number. In my opinion, too many properties being crammed onto this site. The density, I think, depending on where you draw the boundaries, is 3 to 4 times greater than the immediate local area. So this application clearly is not in keeping with the local area. And then finally, I think, so if members of the committee believe in democracy, please support the views of 99.3% of residents and refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. You can clap if you want. So next we have Councillor Worsfold.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let's be honest, we all know that this is a poor development. It's way outside the scope for this site in the local plan, and it will have a crushing impact on local roads. There are very limited safe pedestrian or cycle routes into Shenfield, as Councillor Gordon just stated, and it callously destroys our nature. Now, all of these shortcomings could be mitigated if the development stuck to the number of homes provided in the local plan. Frankly, I despair at the grasp of the English language when a planning inspector says he doesn't know what around means. A 47% uplift in the number of properties is not around by any reasonable definition. It clearly contravenes the local plan. When it comes to road safety and traffic congestion, which we've already heard a lot about, the developers are asking you to join Essex Highways in putting the blinkers on. The junction configuration with Glanthams Road is not safe, and that can't be just brushed aside. The suggestion that the walking route into Shenfield is via Glanthams Road, Warren Road, Parkway and Friars Avenue fails the credibility test at the first hurdle. Crossing over Priest Lane into Glanthams Road. Just picture the congestion and conflicting traffic movements pedestrians would have to cope with, and ask yourself, is that safe? And how many people will actually see a route that is a third of a mile longer as a desirable option anyway? And please don't tell me a bus would be the solution. Where would you put the bus stops in Priest Lane? Again, as Councillor Gordon has very vividly illustrated, how would a bus safely navigate the narrow road? Without a detailed plan showing the location and design of the proposed bus stops, this application is not ready to be approved. My money is on the bus stops never appearing. The same problems surround any suggestion that a crossing or two could be put somewhere on Priest Lane. Where and how? And when it comes to nature, the developers have made no serious attempts to enhance biodiversity on site. No attempt to follow the well-established biodiversity hierarchy and keep our nature in the borough. We must stop exporting our nature, and if we're not going to stop it, now would be a good time to start. And finally, the committee must look very hard at the problems caused by the loss of trees and tree cover that screen the three-storey building on plot 95 from the properties in Bishop's Walk. The overlooking problem that was created is as serious as that caused by the original proposal for plot 7, which was deemed a valid reason for the previous rejection by the inspector. And frankly, immature trees will take decades to provide the same level of screening. In short, this application is far from ready to be approved.
Right, so that's exhausted the people who aren't on the planning committee who we have down to speak. Councillor Cuthbert, Nikki Cuthbert needs to speak and then obviously needs to leave because of her interest living up the road. There are two things, I'm just going to ask two questions so that we can start out having had answers to these two questions. First of all, we've got the statement that Brentwood's Housing Department endorses the ARC Consultancy's review of this application. Now, the ARC Consultancy's review is basically saying that, quote unquote, we cannot support the affordable housing provision proposed. We don't have anybody from housing here because it wasn't apparent that this was going to be a question, but in terms of officers, planning officers, is it the case that by housing endorsing ARC, Brentwood's Housing Department is endorsing the idea that the affordable housing provision is not supported? So in other words, is our housing department not supporting the affordable housing provision? Because that's the most reasonable interpretation I can make of this.
Thank you, Chair. That was my interpretation when I received the comments today that the Housing Department don't support the scheme because of the affordable housing, the smaller units.
Okay, right, thanks for that. Well, so the other question, it may be you or it may not be you who can answer this. The other question is, we had in the Carla Holmes representative's speech, and we also have in several places in the report, reference to what the planning inspector is saying in terms of when the decision about the loss of the tree was made. The planning inspector seems to think that the issue with the tree and the access to the site would have been decided at the time that Brentwood's local plan was thought about and the sites were chosen in the local plan. That doesn't seem to me, from my knowledge of the way the local plan worked, as a reasonable expectation of how the local plan process worked, because it looks like it's looking at the site in too much detail. Whether it's you or whether it's another officer, can we just have a statement on whether we think that the planning inspector was right to think that the site analysis that took place in the local plan was the point at which that decision was made, because it would have been looking at that level of detail?
I believe that, well, and the head of policy has contacted me today to say that it wasn't a detailed assessment. When you look at allocations, it's looking at the site as a whole. There's things that they certainly looked at the highway access. That's the main concern, and then also landscaping on site. And because the site was fairly void of trees, the majority of it, that's why it was accepted, and its location in a sustainable location.
Right, so I think the upshot of that is that the inspector's effectively misunderstanding how the local plan process, the level of detail that the local plan process went into.
I'm not sure. I don't want to say that, because the planning inspector, I've put up on this slide just their assessment of the tree and the arboricultural impact assessment submitted with the application, and they conclude that the tree couldn't be retained as part of the application. And then it's the next sentence that she talks about the local plan process. And I personally don't agree with her statement about the local plan process, because it's high level.
Right, yes, thanks for that. Right, so Councillor Nikki Cuthbert, who needs to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking as a ward councillor for Shenfield, but I also live on Priest Lane and therefore experience the high traffic density and road blockages on a daily basis. 97 homes would be without a doubt a massive overdevelopment and create an even higher density of traffic. I do not wish to repeat points made by the other speakers, but one of my greatest concerns continues to be road safety. Right, hang on. And Priest Lane is used by many children to access various infant, junior and senior schools. And the consequences of substantially increased traffic and another access road onto Priest Lane will further add to the hazards. As has been said before, the lane is extremely narrow and in parts too narrow to allow two vehicles to pass adequately. There are also several sharp bends and long stretches with the pavement on one side only. Also, as we've heard, the close proximity of the proposed access road to Granthams Road is a further hazard. Any vehicle currently turning left out of Granthams Road onto Priest Lane to go towards Shenfield has to unavoidably encroach onto the right-hand side of the lane or mount the curb, and the close proximity of the staggered junction will just make this even more hazardous. I also would question how residents of this potential development will be able to exit onto Priest Lane when stationary traffic backs up daily, far beyond the proposed access road, making turning left out of the site difficult and turning right almost impossible, because you'd have to navigate through a queue of traffic, and given it's a very narrow lane, this is very difficult. This problem can already be seen when a car currently wants to turn right out of Shenfield Crescent onto Priest Lane at the top of the road. Section 106, Head of Terms T10, states that quiet way cycle routes be established between the site and Shenfield, Brentwood and the local area, and should include Priest Lane. It's very difficult to see how this could be achieved, or any improvements made for the additional safety of cyclists or pedestrians, given the constraints of the lane and the volume of traffic. Additionally, the two new bus stops we've been talking about, one in each direction, will be provided on Priest Lane, close to the proposed access, with a pole, flag, raised curbs and passenger information display. Just where these will be remain unknown, But the reality is that there is nowhere they could possibly be located without creating a further serious hazard. The ability to make meaningful road improvements or create public transport links are highly questionable. Regarding the apparent tragic fate of the historic oak tree at the entrance of the site, if there could be some utilisation of the wood and incorporation of an item into the site after it has been felled, that would be welcomed if there's nothing else to be done. I strongly urge the developers to listen to the residents' very real concerns. We, after all, know the area better than anyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. Yeah. We'll just give you the chance to to have a worse experience than the residents and have to leave the meeting, unfortunately. Right. We will go to the first person we've got down to speak, which is Councillor Barrett.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is the third time. I think I wasn't here for every meeting that this was discussed, but this is the third time we've now discussed this as a committee. Not this exact application. Actually, this is a new application. It has changed, and we judge it against current criteria. And when the facts change, our opinion changes. Since the previous application, which was eventually refused, we have changed our strategic housing marketing assessment that we use. So therefore, as our experts, the ARC consultancy, have said, this isn't compliant. The affordable housing provision cannot be endorsed. The proposed affordable housing position, while meeting the headline number of 35%, fails to provide an appropriate size and type mix to meet the identified local need, as evidenced by the Strategic Housing Marketing Assessment 2016. And the Council's guidance note, delivering a suitable balance of affordable housing 2025, which wasn't used in the previous application. For a scheme of 97 houses, the evidence indicates a significant proportion of larger 3- and 4-bed family units within the affordable tenure, including around 8 4-bedroom affordable rent homes. By contrast, the scheme delivers 34 affordable units, heavily weighted to 1- and 2-bedroom dwellings, only 7 3-bedroom and no 4-bedroom homes at all, with the applicant seeking to rely on 2 bedrooms, as described as 2-bedroom 4-people homes, as substitutes for missing larger family houses, notwithstanding the statutory room standard in Section 326, Section 3 and Table 1 of the Housing Act 1985, which treats 2-bedroom dwellings as suitable for 3 people only. The over-provision of smaller units and complete omission of 4-bedroom affordable homes fails to address the borough's acute need for larger family houses and does not support the creation of a balanced community in this allocated site. And therefore, contrary to policy HPO5, affordable housing, HPO1, housing mix, and MGO1, spatial strategy of the local development plan, and paragraph 62 of the National Planning Policy Framework standard method of assessing local housing need. Under those, I therefore move it for refusal.
Right, so you have you've moved for refusal. Do we have anybody who's going to... Councillor Mayo. If you want to speak now, you can speak, or you can reserve your right. Okay, it has been seconded. Okay, so we have a motion for refusal which has been moved and seconded. The next person to speak is Councillor Quirk.
Thanks, Chairman. A number of points. Some of them might turn into questions, if you can bear with me. Sorry, you might have to get up to the lectern again if your microphone's not working, sorry. So first of all, can we clear up the confusion, or rather add some clarity to what Mr Skinner was saying at the beginning of the meeting with regard to R19, and whereby in the previous application it was seen as compliant to have 97 units in R19, despite the fact that R19 specifically talks about 75 units. But I think from what I understood from what he was saying is we've now removed that, as I understand it. Sorry, Mr Skinner, you're probably not allowed to jump up again, I'm afraid. But as I understand it, we've now removed that attestment
from this report. So in other words, report 1 previously says this complies even at 97 units. The report now doesn't say it complies at 97 units. Have I got that right? So just some clarity. Does it comply with R19 or does it not? And I haven't finished, Chairman, if you don't mind.
We answer the question and then you can carry on. Yep.
However you want to do it, I'm fine. I'll have a number of questions. You want to go?
Yeah, we'll go question by question.
Okay. That's why I attached the appeal decision to the papers so that members had the opportunity of reading the appeal decision in full, because the link didn't appear to be working on the previous published document. But the planning inspector, the way that I read the appeal decision, was satisfied, and actually there was, I should say that they talked about the density, because that was a reason for this committee was going to refuse the application, and that's when the planning inspector said that that's why the planning inspector awarded costs in relation to the density. And they talk about in their appeal decision about it complying with R19 in relation to the number of dwellings proposed.
Okay, sorry to be a pedant, but there's a difference between volume and density.
Sorry, she was talking about both.
Okay, all right, thank you. And look, I think, as you're probably getting the gist of, I think there's a number of holes in this application from my point of view, but I also know that, I dare say from the administration's point of view, you're going to want to tread very, very carefully, because this, I think as Mr. Hoskins said earlier on, this will inevitably, if we refuse to go to appeal, and there may or may not be costs. Now, I don't think actually we should have a gun to our head, frankly, insofar as whether we should make the right decision as a committee, depending on whether an applicant, a big multi-billion-pound developer, decides whether he's going to pull the trigger on appeal costs. So I'm not particularly comfortable with that phrasing at the end of Mr. Hoskins' representations, I have to say. The second thing I'd just like to talk about is the planning obligations, which I know you went through in your report. Now, the National Planning Policy Framework specifically talks about planning obligations must be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, but specifically directly related to the development, fairly, reasonably, and related in scale and kind. Now, if some of those planning obligations, as I think I understood, are being commuted into a pool to be used somewhere else at some distant time in the future, how does that accord with paragraphs 55 and 58 of the NPPF in terms of those planning obligations relating specifically to the development?
Those obligations that have been included in the Section 106 for this development, and that was required by the Highways Authority in the case of Priest Lane. And they've got a project for highways improvements. If they don't spend the money, then the projects won't go ahead. But we, as part of the decision on the planning application, you can put the requirements on, but that's as far as you can go.
I guess my point is that the NPPF seems to dictate that the planning obligation should specifically relate to this development rather than being pulled. But also, I presume there's other planning obligations, not just highways. I mean, what about GP spaces? What about school places? Where are we with those in terms of what's been provided for?
Well, that's what the authorities have requested, and that's what the Section 106 and the signatories will agree to that as part of the Section 106. In terms of providing them, as I said, you can put the requirements in, and there are ways that if they can't be specifically met, then, you know, if the projects can't come forward, then the developer, in a certain period of time, then the developer has the right to request.
I guess the issue will be that those houses will then already have been built if those obligations are not met.
And that's the way that the planning system works. It allows for money to be pooled for Section 106 projects.
Okay. let me move, because I could probably do this all day, and I'm sure Councillor Minor will stop me from doing so. Sustainable transport, it's been mentioned 2 or 3 times actually that there is scant provision, particularly when it comes to walking and cycling, because of the nature of Priest Lane. It is, we all know it well, it is a very, very narrow road, but also what's narrow, the pavements. Now, if we're going to add circa 250 to 300 people to that vicinity, it doesn't appear that there's been any pavement improvements made insofar as width. I guess because they can't be, because it's an old road, and we're restricted by the boundaries of the curtilages of the properties along that street. So would that therefore mean that perhaps we haven't met paragraph 104 and 110 of the NPPF in terms of prioritising pedestrian and cycle movement?
The Highways Authority have agreed that the proposal is satisfactory in relation to the NPPF and the County Council's policies. The
politician's answer there, if I might say.
The quiet cycleways, the routes are proposed in the Brentwood Cycle Plan. There are improvements to the access to the site, which is for pedestrians. And I've walked along Priest Lane, and there is crossing at various points, but it is possible to walk down there safely for pedestrians, and also it's a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, which
is ignored. But I know you can't consider that.
Which helps improve pedestrian safety. And in relation to the enforcing the 20-mile-an-hour limit, there are means for the Highway Authority to put in place to enforce
we live in hope. I'll move on finally, because again I'm sure I'll be stopped in a second, but highways, I'm not sure I've ever, I've only been back on the council for 3 or 4 months, but in my previous tenure for 9 years, I'm not sure I've ever seen a highways report from Essex County Council that is detrimental or objects to anything. Not quite sure what the function of Essex County Council highways is, frankly. They never ever say no to anything, and they're certainly not doing that in this instance. The National Planning Policy Framework was updated in 2024 to ensure that whenever a road scenario is tested insofar as a new development, that it is tested in all scenarios, which emphasises that developers must test a range of realistic scenarios, including peak times, cumulative impact, and other approved developments. Now, I'd like to think that the highways inspectors, who say in the report that they visited this site many, many times, have done so not just in school holidays and not just at midday. Do we have a list of the exact dates and times that the highways officer from Essex County Council visited Priest Lane to assess that, in his words, there will only be an extra 6 vehicles queuing up towards Middleton Lane, which is frankly absolutely preposterous. I was sent pictures by a resident today that I think showed about 40 cars from Middleton Lane all the way back down Priest Lane. To add 97 homes and 200 plus people, and for that just to contribute at peak times when Brentwood School is tipping out, or parents are dropping off their children at Brentwood School, etc., etc. For there, honestly, do we really believe that just 6 extra cars are going to manifest themselves at the top of Priest Lane? So do we have those dates and times from Essex County Council Highways to assure ourselves that this was done throughout different days and times?
The short answer is no, but the highways officers have been involved in the allocation assessment, so they've been involved with the proposal for quite a number of years. In addition to that, because there is traffic on the road doesn't mean that the highway isn't safe. So yes, it is annoying for residents to be stuck in traffic, as it is for anyone. But in terms of highway safety and the requirements for highways, the Highway Authority is satisfied that the proposal.
But the NPPF isn't just concerned, this particular clause isn't just concerned with safety. It does specifically talk about the residual cumulative impacts on the road network, and if they are severe, then planning permission can be refused. It's not just safety, it's also congestion.
The highways officer is familiar with the NPPF requirements, and and at appeal, he and the applicant's expert consultant agreed. So that as far as the highway safety, highways matters are concerned, the planning appeal determined the application that it was acceptable.
Yeah,
so
no, I don't aim this at you, but that, I mean, it's laughable. And frankly, the planning inspector, of course, would have only looked at what he had in front of him, or she. So if, of course, the report said this is fine, then that is the decision that the planning inspector will make. But the planning inspector perhaps did not ask the question that I've just asked. When were these assessments made? Because if they were made at 8:15 on a Monday morning in the middle of November, I think we will agree that this application is absolutely outrageous and should be refused. So I certainly will be voting against this application and supporting Councillor Barrett's motion for refusal.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Quirk. Mr Bell wants to speak.
Thank you. Just to pick on a couple of issues that you've raised, Councillor Quirk. With regards to the 106 element, if you had a development, let's say, of 10 dwellings, each would make a contribution, let's say, to a school. It wouldn't then provide a school itself, because the school itself could be £6 to £9 million to build said school. So it is very common that a development provides a per dwelling contribution towards an infrastructure project. And then when, in this case, the county council has sufficient funds, then carries out said project. It's the same principle when it comes to building schools. A development of, say, 100 dwellings wouldn't necessitate building a school. In fact, it wouldn't be viable to build a school. So that's how it works when it comes to planning obligations.
Sorry, Chair, just come back. I hear that, but I think, look, what the MPPF is suggesting here is that, of course, that school would be built near the development.
Councillor Quirk, you've had a pretty good run already. Can we have? I'm be prepared to let you come back because I'm pretty lenient when it comes to the 5 minutes. But we'll give some other people the opportunity to speak. So the next person we have on the list to speak. Do you want to carry on, Councillor? Yes.
I just wanted to make a couple of points. The other points being is there's reference to the number of dwellings in here. I would point members to paragraph 23 on page 76 of your report, which is the inspector's decision, which concludes, while the proposal provides more dwellings than anticipated through the allocation of the site, in the absence of finding harm as a result of the proposed density, this would not be a reason to refuse the proposed development. So I'm pointing that out to you. So I would ask that members just read that, and then please read paragraph 43, which is at page 79, which says that the proposal would have an acceptable effect on the operation of the highway network, subject to a residential travel plan, off-site highway pedestrian and cycle enhancements. Again, as I remind you, highway consultee comments carry great weight in terms of material considerations. So I point those elements out just for clarity, so members can just be mindful. We do have an inspector's decision. I'm putting you towards paragraph 23 on the housing. I'm putting you towards paragraph 43 when it comes to the comments regarding highways. On affordable housing, the 106 sets up that a scheme has to be submitted prior to commencement or prior to implementation. Such scheme could include variations to that, as agreed by the officer at the time the scheme comes in. And the reason why it's set up like that is because when you approve a development, by the time the decision is issued, by the time that scheme's in, you could be 3-4 years down the line. And on that basis, your affordable housing scheme should meet the needs at the time, not necessarily the point of the decision. So that's how 106s work. That's how they work for other authorities. That's how the Section 106 is set up.
Thank you. Mr Bell.
Just a point of order, Chair. I just don't understand what's the point of having policies that we consider things against if you have to consider a what-if scenario 4 years down the line. That's ridiculous.
Yes, Councillor McShane. We'll go to Councillor McShane. There's a point raised. I'm going to try and remember it. It needs to come back to Councillor McShane.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to point out, what was the point of the LDP? Phil Drain worked on it for years, and his team, and they come up with a certain number in this site, which the infrastructure could put up with the houses, the roads, the hospitals, and the doctors' schools, all that sort of thing. And suddenly we're told an extra 30+% is okay. Well, if you carried that through for the whole of the borough, that would be an extra few thousand in Brentwood. It seems as if the developer hasn't worked with the local people at all, unlike the one in Blackmore, where they worked out, they worked with the developer, the people worked with the developer, they come up with less houses, and everybody was happy, and the developer thought, well, he can still make money out of this. And this is, I just think this scheme is ridiculous. It took me half an hour to get here tonight, so with all that extra traffic on the road.
You weren't the only one that was delayed, I know. Councillor Hugh Gorton.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay, Chair, I've got one question and then some comments. So my question to the officer is on condition 9, referring to sustainable drainage. Condition 9 requires a maintenance plan for the surface water drainage system with a rigorous maintenance regime for the pumping station. Will this also be required for foul water drainage? And who will be responsible for the maintenance of the pumping station? Will it be the developer, and if so, for how long? Or will it be Anglian Water? Or will it fall to the residents to pay for the maintenance of the pumping station?
Thank you, Chair. The condition requires the maintenance plan to cover all of the sustainable drainage measures. So at this point in time, the details haven't been provided, so I can't say who's going to be responsible. But it's covered. It may be a resident association that has the maintenance company, or it may be the developer. It's not something that is part of the application.
Thank you. I do have some comments on the highways aspect of matters. Obviously, many of the residents' concerned and ward councillors' concerns are to do with highways matter, and I think Essex County Council, as the Highways Authority, have not given this application the attention it deserves. The transport assessment acknowledges that the two crucial junctions at the north end of Priest Lane will be at overcapacity or near it in 3 years' time, even without this development. These are the junctions with Middleton Hall Lane and the junction of the latter with Ingrave Road. The officer's report states that this development could generate 62 extra car journeys during peak hours. That's one car every minute turning out of the access to the development onto Priest Lane in the morning peak. The transport assessment backs this up, predicting an increase in traffic on Priest Lane of up to 5% in the morning peak. Essex County Council have carried out a safety audit of the access, but otherwise their involvement appears to have been entirely passive. They actually refer to paragraph 116 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which states developments should only be refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road safety network would be severe following mitigation, and I would stress following mitigation. I predict that we will see severe congestion at the junctions, at the junction of Priest Lane and Middleton Hill Lane at peak times when this development is fully occupied. Essex County Council are not planning any improvements to Priest Lane. The Section 106 contribution for highways is going elsewhere, with £50,000 going to improve the double mini roundabout junction on Ingrave Road with the avenue and running waters. There's no plans to improve the Middleton Lane junctions or to upgrade the pavement on Priest Lane or, and this is quite important, to enforce the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Speeding is a big problem on this road, as all local residents know. And the traffic survey indicates that 15% of traffic is actually moving at more than 31 miles an hour, way above the speed limit. There are a couple of welcome contributions towards active travel and sustainable transport in the Section 106 heads of terms. And these are the £234,000 towards cycle routes linking the site to Shenfield, and I think Brentwood, but I'm not sure about that, via Glantham Road, Warren Road, Parkway and Friars Avenue. But where's the detail for the cycle route going towards Brentwood? Would it be up Priest Lane, which is eminently unsuitable? Priest Lane is not suitable as a quiet cycle route. It's completely the opposite. I do welcome the £234,000 for public transport improvements from the site to Shenfield and Brentwood. I assume this means a regular bus service, but as has been mentioned several times already, where are the bus stops going to go? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Corson. Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the residents who submitted so much feedback on this application. We do read and listen to points made, and thank you for doing that. I think it's interesting with such a decisive response from the local residents, the local 3 ward councillors. That's the first thing that always flags any application to me as being problematic. It's unusual to get such a high level of opposition to an application, so we need to look at it incredibly carefully. A couple of things. I won't go into the detail of what Councillor Barrett said. I know he's an expert on that subject, and he knows the topic very well in terms of the affordable housing. But I want to focus, yes, on the road safety issues. It's unfortunate I don't believe we have anyone from Essex Highways here this evening. Great shame, because some of the questions I would like to ask them are about the lack of compliance with the 20-mile-an-hour limit on that road, which I have observed many times, and I know many of my colleagues have as well. The staggered junction with Glanthams, indeed, is particularly awkward. I saw a couple of things. First of all, in the officer report, I think it's on page 33, where it basically says the site has plenty more space on it to squeeze in. Page 39, the site clearly has a greater capacity than 35 dwellings, and the layout does not appear to be cramped form of development. However, in the local development plan under R19, 9.159, it says the development will take its main vehicular access from Priest Lane it will be expected to adequately mitigate its likely impacts on the performance of the local and strategic road network. Now, this application really doesn't seem to do that at all. We've got basically the promise of bus stops, and I haven't heard any commitment that there will actually be a bus service running using those bus stops. Sounds like they're just going to be installed, tick the box, the developer's done what they need to, and I would love to hear from officers confirmation that a service will definitely be provided, 100%. Otherwise, it's a pointless thing, disrupting the pavements. Also, the number of access points to the site. You obviously say, I think it's page 35 and page 77, that this is addressed because not all of the site is before us tonight. But if I asked also the second question to the officers, so the first one is the bus stops, the second one is what proportion of the site is in the application that's with us tonight? Because if we're saying in R19 we should have access points, if the vast majority of the site is being developed as part of this application, yeah, we cannot predict the future. We have no assurance that there's another access point coming onto that road for to spread the traffic load, because these large developments where you have a single point of entry and exit are problematic. We're seeing them more and more around the borough, and they will lead to issues in due course. And for that reason, I really cannot support this application tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. Councillor Rigby.
I did ask you
yes,
questions.
you did. You're absolutely right, and thanks for reminding me. So, answers to those questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to your highlighting on page 39, I was quoting the inspector's comments in that paragraph 6.10. In relation to the bus stops, they will be applied for and they're required to be in place or the details to be agreed prior to first occupation. So I would suggest then that it's going to be early on in the proposal that the developer will contact the Highways Authority and their passenger transport team to discuss the location of the bus stops.
Sorry, apologies. There is a difference between a bus stop being provided and a bus service being provided. My question was, are we building bus stops where there will be no probability of an actual service being run? And it will meet the criteria of the planning application because you've installed a bus stop, but then you're not going to actually have a bus that's using it.
The Highways Authority have plans in place for smaller buses that they don't have the details, but to provide a public transport route along Priest Lane. So I can't say any more than that because it's the Highways Authority's proposal, but that is the proposal at this stage. Turning to the access, the R19 does refer to Priest Lane access points, but the R19 doesn't show any other access point. So I think it's allowing flexibility if one of the adjoining neighbours on Priest Lane, a developer was to purchase a property, then I think possibly that was to allow for that. But the R19 site has one access point.
Sorry, Chair. Apologies. My question was, what percentage of the site allocation are we considering tonight? Because on page I think 77, it actually says that because it's not the full site, the fact that only one access point is available at the moment is sufficient to meet the criteria of R19, and that there could be another one in the future. So my question is, what was the percentage of the overall allocation before us this evening, please?
I don't have the exact figure, but I would say it's probably about 95%. It's the majority of the site. There's only a small section, and the Highways Authority are aware of that additional site that could come forward.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to keep things mentally straight. Councillor Rigby, you go next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the various residents and residents' associations who've spoken tonight. They've spoken passionately, instructively, intelligently and well, and that's a tribute to them, as is the sheer number, volume and depth of the contributions that have been made to this and previous applications, which is a testament to the civic health of our borough and the concern that exists in relation to this development. I'd also like to thank members of the committee for their various contributions, which I think have been sufficiently incisive from all sides. That's a positive function of this committee. And thank you, Chair, for enabling them to speak as well and question as well, if they have done. Without presupposing the result of the motion for refusal, I have a question and a suggestion in relation to the tree, T23, assuming that a motion for approval may go forward. And I'd just like to raise that with the officer. I have discussed it with the Chair and Vice Chair in advance, and I've made ward councillors aware of the possibility of this. If I can ask the officer to turn to page 55, paragraph 6 of the section 106, oak tree mitigation. There's a series of requirements there in relation to the heavy standard trees, the beetle loggeries, the bleed bricks and the bird boxes. Those are all mitigation measures which would take place in the event that the application was approved. Is that not right?
That's correct. And then there's another condition in relation to the tree. I think it's condition 7. No, it's just condition 6. There's a lot of parts to condition 6.
And that would be in accordance with the ethos ecological impact assessment and the appropriate details contained therein, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Obviously, it's been made clear to us that the tree will have to come down if the application is approved and such like. I follow up on Councillor Nikki Cuthbert's suggestion in relation to reuse of the material of the tree. I would like to propose a condition in 2 parts, which I believe may be acceptable to the developer and which I've raised with yourself previously. I'm going to read that out for the benefit of the committee, just to cover the contingency, and I'll read as follows. The oak tree, referred to as T23 within section 11 of the approved arboricultural impact assessment by Hall Wood Associates, document reference HWA 10938.2 APIII 7.0, shall not be removed until a method statement detailing felling and extraction methods have been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. Method statement, part 1, shall include details of felling and extraction methods for felling T23 to maximise the recovery of any high-quality hardwood sections. In 6 months of removal of the tree, in accordance with the approved method statement, on assessment of the suitability of wood for repurposing and a strategy for reuse shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the APA Part 2. The strategy will include details of availability and suitability, details of availability and suitability of any high-quality hardwood section for use for a focal structure or bench or any other items, and on that conversion, process, specifications, and drawings for the use of any such sections, for focal sculpture, benches and other items, and numerical marking. Details for permanent engraving to be incorporated in at least one of the benches or other agreed items identified as a historic Bluestone oak and noting its historical significance for the site, placement and timetable, a plan showing the location of a focal sculpture or benches or other agreed items and a schedule for their installation. The work should be carried out in strict accordance with the details approved under this condition, including the timetable for delivery of any agreed items. Now, the reason I mention this condition and raise it here is that should the motion for refusal fail, and should a motion for approval succeed, I would like that condition in the section 106 so that some use of the tree, if it has to go, is made for the benefit of the residents who will live on the site and indeed in wider Priest Lane more generally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Right. Okay, so I think I'm just going to say a couple of things at this point. First of all, on the subject of highways, we made a direct appeal for highways to attend this meeting, and highways said no, they didn't want to attend this meeting, so we tried, that's all we can do. Now, on the heading of the various people have raised various highways issues, which is why highways, it would have been good if they were here on Priest Lane. There's a specific concern which I've picked up on in terms when you start taking some of this stuff to pieces and working out how one thing relates to other things. And actually, the response that Mr. Bell gave earlier on to questions that were being asked in terms of highways issues, Mr. Bell directed us to page 79, which is where we've got the inspector's appeal decision. And the paragraph 79, yes, so paragraph 43, the proposal would, this is the inspector speaking, the proposal would have an acceptable effect on the operation of the highway network, subject to a residential travel plan and off-site highway pedestrian and cycle enhancements. Right, so we've got on page 51, we've got section 106 heads of terms, and one of those heads of terms is a proposal, is T10, is a proposal for quiet way cycle routes between this site and Shenfield, Brentwood and the local area, quote unquote. Now, Councillor Worsfold was talking in terms of the extended distance that would be needed if you're travelling down the back roads to get to Shenfield. It is possible, obviously crossing Priest Lane, you do feel like you're taking your life in your hands on occasions, and we've all been there. It is possible by the roads which are being quoted in both in that and in the earlier stuff earlier in the report, which is talking about R19, page 36, which also refers to Middleton Hall Lane amongst those names. It is possible, you can see how it would be possible to get to Shenfield by those back roads. And you could see also, if you know those roads, how those roads, at least some of those roads, some of them more than others, could be thought of as quiet way cycle route roads. However, we also have to be convinced that it's possible to get from the access point of this development to Brentwood along what could be a quiet way cycle route. Now, I'm just going to quote what Brentwood's own local plan, how it characterises a quiet way cycle route. This is what the local plan says. It says that it should be a continuous, high-quality, well-signed cycle route using mainly less trafficked or traffic-free routes, such as side streets, parks and waterways. Now, I'm just going to genuinely, I'm just going to do this. I would like any member of the committee who, hand on heart, can think of the western end of Priest Lane and the description of a less trafficked or a traffic-free route. Who thinks that the western end of Priest Lane could be characterised as a less trafficked or a traffic-free route? Does anybody think that on this committee? Not one person. Okay, so, yeah.
Can I just ask through you, Chair, Mr. Bell? We've got a motion from Councillor Dr. Barrett, seconded by Councillor Mayo. It isn't a collective editing of our views and opinions. It's whatever Councillor Barrett wishes to use as the reasons for his refusal, because he will be the person proposing the refusal. With respect, it shouldn't be a collaborative debate. Councillor Barrett, having heard the debate, should come back, I believe, with the reasons that he feels that he can stand by for refusing, and we go from there. And I would like clarification, please, from Mr. Bell, that my understanding of the process is correct.
Yes, I mean, the reasons put forward so far are HPO1 and HPO5, if I understand from Councillor Barrett.
The point I'm making here is that the response that we had in directing us to the inspector's comments on the highways issue is the crucial point there is the words subject to. And the problem I've got, and apparently the problem that the rest of the committee has got, is that we've got a report here which is telling us that our section 106 heads of terms is expecting there to be possible to create a quiet way cycle route between this site and Brentwood, quote unquote. But the only possible route, which is Priest Lane, is a route that nobody on this committee seems to think could possibly be a quiet way cycle route. So if you go back to what the inspector has said, the inspector's saying that the highways issues here are acceptable, but they're only acceptable subject to the possibility for there being off-site highway and pedestrian improvements. And we've effectively just as a committee, and this is obviously not us voting in terms of the motion, but just as a committee, we've effectively now just said, we don't think that the off-site highway and pedestrian improvements proposed, which include the quiet way cycle routes, are actually deliverable, because the western end of Priest Lane doesn't seem possible that it could be a quiet way cycle route. So the question I had, and I asked this question of officers before the meeting, and it goes to some of the things that have been raised, is even if all of the other things that we might have concerns with about this application were things that we were prepared to set aside and think they're okay, because of what the inspector said and various other issues, if we're in a situation where we're looking at Section 106 agreements and we don't actually think those Section 106 agreements are deliverable, and these Section 106 agreements are things which are, quote unquote, necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, and when you look at other places of the inspector's report in terms of what they're saying about the cycleway proposals, there is no detail. Page 77, paragraphs 30, 31, there is no detail whatsoever. It's very clear that the inspector hasn't looked in any detail at the deliverability of the quiet way cycle routes. That's a concern that I've got, and I'm prepared, at least in principle, to say that's an issue for another time, getting the Section 106 stuff absolutely right. But we have not been previously with applications in this council in a situation where we've tried to say yes, even if we were saying yes to this application, whilst at the same time looking at Section 106 proposals listed and thinking these are not actually deliverable. What do we do if we don't think the Section 106 agreements on this site are deliverable? So I asked that question to officers before the meeting, so I'd like an answer now, because obviously it will obviously inform the vote that will take place. Because the point here is, all of this stuff connects together. If we can't actually prove to our own happiness tonight, and this is the time that we need to do it, that this is deliverable, all of that stuff leads back to what the inspector said, and effectively it means that what the inspector is quoted as saying on paragraph 70, on page 79, paragraph 43, is something that we can't actually take on board because it's the subject to is not functioning. We can't; those off-site highway and pedestrian improvements can't be delivered. So I've got a big concern here, and we need to know the answer to this.
Thank you, Chair. So, of course, Essex County Council are the Highways Authority and they are the technical highways experts. We have to take their advice very seriously, and their advice is that this is what they've asked for and what they believe is deliverable. I mean, if we go, and we've talked about it a bit over the course of the evening, this site is a local plan allocation, so it's been assessed at that local plan allocation level, and it's come down and been assessed at a planning application level, and again that has been gone to a planning inspector, so both the local plan and the appeal went to planning inspectors who both considered that this was acceptable. So we've got a highway authority and two inspectors saying that what they would like to put in is what they consider to be acceptable and deliverable and required by the site. So it is really difficult for us as non-highway engineers to go against that expertise, and certainly a inspector in a future appeal will give heavy weight to the opinion of the Highways Authority. But Stephen may want to add from a legal perspective.
As I said before, a great weight is given to highway consultee because they are the experts. They are the ones with the relevant qualifications, the relevant understanding to enable So to look at this particular proposal and look at contributions and the mitigation that's required. It's very difficult for us to go against expert recommendations and expert commentary without having the relevant expertise ourselves. So the fact is, the package of mitigation that's contained in the 106 are deemed relevant and necessary from the statutory consultee expert in this area.
Okay, thanks for that. I mean, the thing here really is that it's pretty clear-cut in a way. It would be very useful to have a highways officer here because we could then ask the highways officer whether, in their view, the western end of Priest Lane could possibly be described as a less trafficked or a highway-free route. Because, I mean, obviously they could say that they thought that, but I'm not sure that there's anybody, with the exception of the applicants, who would think that. In this room, and a highways officer saying that would have an interesting response. Sorry, I'm not including officers, obviously. Apologies if that was a.
Sorry, Chair.
Yep.
I just wanted to point out that the Essex County Council does have a cycle action plan which shows that road, and I shared that map with you today. That shows that road as a quiet route. And I think it's amusing for some, but that's the authority that they have.
Yeah. Yes. The problem is that I'm personally prepared, taking my role as chair seriously. I'll come to you, Councillor Mayor, in just a moment. Just taking my role as chair seriously, I'm prepared to swallow a load of things that I really wish I didn't have to swallow with various different planning applications. But I'm not in a position where I'm prepared to accept that black is white, that up is down, that hot is cold, that tomorrow is yesterday. And I am not seeing a quiet way cycle route between this site and Brentwood. And I don't, highways can claim it's there. I don't see it. We've got evidence of the width of the road. We've got evidence of the problems with vehicles passing, and I personally have seen vehicles have to stop in order to let another vehicle get past, and we're not talking about big lorries, we're talking about a van and a car. And the point that was made by Councillor Gordon, for instance, about fire engines and ambulances, I mean, those are the kinds of vehicles that we clearly have an issue here. And that's the situation at present. If you're trying to put in some kind of quiet way cycle route along a road which is simply not quiet, where there is no room, there's not even enough room to put two pavements in, let alone a cycle route as well as the road, as well as a pavement. I'm really struggling with the deliverability of this, and that's personal. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if anyone else is due to speak, but the basis of the motion for refusal is affordable housing. Okay, and I'm gonna just focus on that. I take all the points on board about highways. I've sympathised with a great deal of them. I've listened to what Mr. Bell says, and I too thought, okay, we're on sticky ground if we go down the highways route. The only time, to answer Councillor Quirk's question, the only time I'm aware of highways ever objecting was actually to the application for the Lidl site, which we then got overturned by the inspectorate. And as that's my ward, we're going to be living with the implications of that. So I'm just going to focus and be concise about why I'm supporting Councillor Barrett's motion. And it is basically covered by the pages 70 and 69 regarding the assessment of ARC that was asked for, requested, in relation to this application that we're looking at tonight, which was submitted in October. And prior to January's planning committee, it was raised that ARC, who had previously commented, had not provided comments on the updated guidance that was issued earlier in the year, and that is key. So, when assessed against the guidance, the proposed mix over-provides smaller units, which was actually referenced by Kate Webster in her submission as well. We've got plenty of flats, okay? We do not have anywhere near enough social and affordable housing for families, and that's why the guidance was adopted. So I'm just going to read out the conclusion on page 70 from ARC, which says, well, while the proposal meets the quantum of affordable housing, which is what was stressed by the
applicant, the mix of affordable housing does not fully comply with the guidance due to an over-reliance on smaller units and the absence of larger family-sized four-bedroom accommodation. We cannot support the affordable housing provision proposed. Now, in what we were provided prior to tonight, and indeed in the presentation, it actually suggested that the housing team of this council thought that on balance that wasn't a problem. We found out this evening that actually the housing team have said, actually, we endorse what ARC have said, and therefore our view is this is not compliant with HPO 5, which is the affordable housing element and policy, and HPO 1 on housing mix. And on that basis, because I think that is a changed situation and not what was assessed by the inspector, I believe that is sufficient for us to refuse this application tonight, and that is why I'm seconding it.
Thank you, Councillor Mayo. Right, just for my own purposes and so that we can get some clarity on the highway side and appreciate what's being said in terms of the reasons being given for refusal. If tonight isn't the time for us to be satisfied that the Section 106 stuff is deliverable, when would that time be? If there's a time further down the road when we are ultimately saying this is either going to work or it's not going to work, then if somebody can tell us now when that would be, obviously people can be geared up for it. But at the moment, we still haven't had a straight answer as to whether tonight is the time that we have to be convinced that that is deliverable or not. So could we have an answer to that?
I can answer that. The issue, there are two reasons for refusal as put forward by Councillor Barrett and seconded by Councillor Mayo. Those are on HPO 1 and HPO 5. In terms of the highways element, you've heard my advice, and I think there is a real risk if you're going against the statutory consultee to which great weight should be given. But of course, as part and parcel, if there is an appeal, there will be discussions with regards to highway and the 106 as part and parcel of that. So that doesn't have to be a reason for refusal, and I'm advising it not be a reason for refusal.
Yeah, I'm not preempting anything. I'm trying to get my head around. Let's assume that motion fails. It may or may not fail, but if it did fail, I mean, just want people to be. No, I just want people to be clear where we are. I just want people to be clear where we are. I'll come back to you in a moment. I just want people to be clear where we are. Are we actually having to decide whether we're happy with that tonight? Because even if it's not part of the reasons given for refusal, if we're not happy with it, if we don't think it's actually deliverable, I'm not prepared to let us go past that bump in the road if this is the point when it happens. Does it happen tonight? Do we need to be convinced tonight that this is deliverable or not? If, for instance, we did have a motion for approval, which we may not get to.
In effect, we're going to have to deal with the vote first, and I think that's the point that Councillor Barber is making. Let's deal with that vote first. If there is an issue with regards to the 106, we've already had the report and the commentary with regard to the sufficiency of the obligations in the 106. I suppose I can't see any other way of dealing with this other than a deferral to discuss the content of the 106 with Essex County Council, which you will appreciate would require us to then come back, and of course the applicant has been made very clear as to their position. I appreciate that it shouldn't be determinative, but you're very clear as to the applicant's position, and you're very clear that the consultee, the highways, the County Council has been the consultee in this and have deemed that these contributions are necessary and relevant to the development proposed.
I want to come back on Councillor Barber.
We have a motion in front of us, and Councillor Mayer was extremely helpful in clarifying the scope of the reasons for refusal. Rather than going on a hypothetical discussion about what other motions might be raised tonight, should that one fail, can we please hear two things? One, confirmation from the officers that the point that Councillor Mayo said about the new information that had become available is agreed. And secondly, can we hear their response to the reasons for refusal? And then I think we should proceed to the vote and make an informed decision.
Thank you, members. So, yes, it is correct that, as you know, because it came to committee, we did produce some revised guidance on affordable housing mix levels between these applications. So that is the case. This application is not in line with those new with that new guidance. Again, I think that is a matter of fact, and that's set out in the officer's report. But given that this is an allocated site, given that there are no objections from any other statutory consultees, given the material consideration of the previous appeal decision, officers consider on balance that that was not, in their recommendation, sufficient to justify a refusal of the planning application. Obviously, if committee feel they have different reasoning, then obviously that's what they can go for.
Councillor Mayer?
Sorry, just to clarify, the planning officers feel that's a good reason for it, not the housing officers, correct?
So ultimately, the planning officers are considering all the responses from all the statutory consultees, weighing everything up, and then they have to balance all the different factors and come to a recommendation for committee. So in balancing all those factors, in this case, we didn't, as planning officers, we didn't consider that that difference in affordable housing size mix tipped the balance between to refusal.
Councillor Baldock?
Yes, a bit of a peculiar situation because we all know the highways decision is nonsense, but nevertheless, the inspectorate is going to pay attention to that because they're the expert. I mean, they're wrong, obviously, but they're the expert. Now, would ARC not be deemed to be an expert? And then it's up to us to put what weight we choose to put towards this. Now, if we were to say, you know, we're warned time and again to be careful against going against previous inspectors' decisions because we're just going to get hammered for hundreds of thousands of pounds. Whereas this one, we haven't. There isn't a planning inspectorate's decision against us. So even if we were to lose, would we be hammered for hundreds of thousands of pounds when there is clear expert guidance there? That's the question. What's our risk?
I don't think anybody in the room can tell us whether we would be hammered for hundreds of thousands of pounds. I did see Mr. Bell nodding. I don't know if anybody wants to confirm that ARC would be regarded as expert.
Yes, I mean, they're the experts, and it is a question of weight. The question of costs is a result of unreasonable behaviour in terms of the reasons for refusal. That's the issue that would be before the inspector, was the reasons for refusal were they unreasonable, in effect?
Okay, so we have had... Councillor McShane, briefly.
As Councillor Meyer brought up about the inspector that refused the one at Liddell, and then when it came to the inspector, it was allowed. Can this be brought forward as one of the reasons as well? Can we say, look, the inspector isn't our Essex Highways isn't always right?
Does anybody want to comment on that?
I think, members, as we've discussed, we would not recommend you use highways as a reason for refusal at this application.
It's a fair point, and it's a sore point in Brentwood North and in other places. Yes, we know. Right, so we've had a motion for refusal, which has been duly seconded, and we will go to the vote on that motion for refusal.
Thank you, Chair. Would members please indicate for or against the motion when their name is called? Councillor Minot.
Abstain.
Councillor M. Cuthbert.
For.
Councillor Baldock. For. Councillor Barber. Councillor Dr Barrett. Councillor Gelderbloom. Councillor Gorton. Councillor Mayo. Councillor McShane. Councillor Patel. Councillor Quirk. Councillor Rigby. Thank you, Chair. The motion to refuse is carried. Thank you.
Sorry, just to clarify, is that on policy HPO1 and HPO5? Thank you.
Right, we'll have a pause while the people who are here for the Priest Lane site leave, and we've got one more item. We'll have a 5-minute break for Lou's and anybody who needs it. Yeah, is the stream still going? Shall we pause the stream? Oh, okay. All right. We'll people can watch the.
I just say to members.
Right, I think we're all present, aren't we? So, let's just move on. We have our second and final item, which is item 5, and this is Burncastle 78 Pear Tree Lane, Doddinghurst, and the application is for a conversion of a garage to habitable accommodation, extend the front dormer and single-storey front extension and porch, add a part single, part two-storey rear extension, apply render to dwelling and construction of detached something or other annex. This is for application number 25/00686/HHA. The recommendation is to approve, and the case officer is Miss Jane Lowe. Jane Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. One further representation has been received from neighbours and uploaded today in the form of photos. The photos are not too dissimilar to those already received, identifying the position of the sun in relation to the neighbour's dwelling. These do not affect the recommendation. It is considered the proposal... Oh, sorry. The application site forms a detached chalet dwelling located within Pear Tree Lane, overlooking a field and paddock area. Proposals seek to convert the garage, add a pitched roof to the front, add a front single-storey extension for the porch canopy, increase the width of the front dormers, and add a part single, part two-storey rear extension to the dwelling with a detached annex located within the rear. The application was presented at November's committee, where the application was deferred for a member's site visit, which took place on the 13th of December. Following the site visit, it was established the site boundary was incorrect, plus revised drawings had been received detailing the proposed parking arrangements. Due to comments raised at committee, the agent has also taken it upon himself to submit a sunlight report, even though the scale of the proposals do not warrant such a report, and officers found the proposals acceptable. Revised block plan details the boundary inset, a realignment of the annex, and the layout of 3 parking spaces. This is revision F, detailing a revised boundary and a revised positioning of the annex. The proposal extends 4 metres to the rear at ground floor level, 2 metres at first floor, with a double hipped roof design. Since the original submission, the proposals have been reduced at first floor level by 1 metre in depth and a hipped roof added. The hedgerow is being retained along the boundary. The extension follows the building lines of the existing building and is offset from the current boundary. This slide shows a comparison between the existing and the proposed development and identifies the hipped roof design. Officers consider the proposal would not lead to an overbearing form of development, given the design set down from the ridge and offset from the boundary. The next slide shows the host dwelling, front and rear gardens, with a view of the garden and the side view of the retained hedge. These slides show the host dwelling benefits from access to the rear garden from both sides of the property. The first photograph identifies a 4-metre tape measure where the extension is proposed, detailing the separation to the common boundary and hedge. The next slides show photographs taken from the neighbour's garden looking towards the shared boundary. The neighbouring property is set at an angle to the boundary and displays out, providing a minimum separation measured from the line of the dwelling to the rear boundary, 10.2 metres, with a maximum depth of 15.6 metres. This measurement was taken from the line from the rear elevation of the dwelling. The proposal would run parallel to the boundary with a depth of 2.75 metres at 2-storey level with a hipped roof design, continuing a further 2 metres at single-storey level at 3.5 metres in height. The following slides show extracts from the sunlight report that has been submitted. The requirements, this slide and the following slide show an existing comparison, existing and proposed. The BRE recommend that for a garden to be adequately sunlit throughout the year, at least half of the garden or amenity area should receive at least 2 hours of sunlight on 21st of March. You will see here that the development clearly complies with this requirement. This is 11 o'clock, then it runs through to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The application was deferred for a member's site visit. Revised plans detail the parking arrangements and revised boundary, the alignment of the annex. Following last committee and due comments raised by members, the agent has taken upon himself to submit sunlight shadow assessment. The report clearly shows the amenity areas serving the neighbouring properties complies with the requirements of the BRE, where on March 21st, spring equinox, the garden should receive adequate sunlight throughout the year to at least half of the garden amenity area, receiving at 2 hours. Drawings indicate the hedges to be retained, annexes for a family member. If used as a separate dwelling, plan permission will be required. It is considered the proposal would not to lead to an open barrier form of design, set down from the ridge and offset from the boundary. The applicant raises personal circumstances, but officers have reached the view the proposals are acceptable. There is no requirement to consider this, but if members are minded to refuse, they must be of material consideration as a recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms Lowe. Right, so we have various people to speak. We have Mr Michael Ramsey, who is an objector, to speak.
Is it possible for me to say one thing before I read? Just to say that the photographs of the hedge are very misleading because most of it's already been destroyed. Not by me. I read, my name is Michael Ramsey and I live at 70 Pear Tree Lane. I would firstly like to reiterate all my objections made previously, referring to the applicant's sunlight report that concludes the comparative analysis confirms that the proposed development maintains the same level of sunlight access for the neighbouring property as the current build conditions. With respect, this is the most ridiculous statement when the applicant proposes to build a huge extension from the apex of his roof to our apple tree, which is about half the width of our garden, completely blocking the sun and light for most of the day in the winter. I refer to the photographs that I have submitted, to which have been entered into the public portal, taken on the 4th and 6th of February, when we realised that we would be able to speak at this meeting. These show that the sun we receive now and what it would be like if the application was allowed. The photographs show that on 4th of February, the sun past its zenith at 12:33 is only just clearing the chimney, well below the apex of the roof, as shown by photograph number 2. The sun still has to arrive past the apple tree where the extension would reach, which is close to the edge of the photo. All this sun would be lost. Photos 1 and 3 taken at 12:32 and 12:34 in the sitting and dining rooms show how much sun would be lost if approved. Photo 4 taken on the 6th of February, a dull day, at 11:42 shows what the sitting room would look like if this was granted. And photo 5 taken at 12:47 shows sun trying to appear below the apex. Photo 6 taken at 13:35 showing the sun below the apex, which means from October to at least the end of February, a period of at least 5 months, our house and garden would be deprived of sun and light. When the sun shines, it really warms our dining and sitting rooms, and it can bring the temperature up to 23 degrees without any form of heating. The applicant keeps mentioning overshadowing, and this is not the problem. He really does not seem to understand that if this application was allowed, it would block the sun from our house and garden. Even in summer, the sheer mass of it would mean that we would get less sunlight and none at all closer to the hedge, which would be tiny compared to the wall. If granted, this application would cause severe harm to our amenity. We respectfully ask that this application be refused. My thanks goes to the committee for taking the time to visit our home.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Right, the next person to speak is Debbie Dicker from Donninghurst Parish Council.
Thank you. Donninghurst Parish Council objects primarily on the grounds of overdevelopment of the site. Specific concerns and suggested amendments should planning permission be granted. 1. The rear extension will have an overbearing effect on the property at 70 Pear Tree Lane. If the rear extension was to be shortened by a few metres, it would have a less negative impact. The hipped roof on the rear extension would also alleviate the overwhelming effect and reduce the mass of the building. 2. Plans show the development straying over the neighbour's boundary with number 70. A pinch point in the area would result in the development requiring the removal of the hedge. Would result in this development requiring the removal of the hedge. It is shown to be built right up to the boundary, and it should be impossible to physically build the extension without putting scaffolding in the neighbour's garden. Concern also for the future use of the self-contained annex in the garden. We would request a planning condition restricting third-party occupancy so that it could only be used by a family member and not rented out or sold. Concern was also raised regarding the emergency access to the annex, as the only access is via the main property. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Right, so the third person to speak is Mr. Luke Davis, the agent.
Read me own right. Oh, I'm sorry. Apologise.
Thought I was doing so wrong. Right, good evening. This proposal has been carefully developed over time and has been subject to extensive scrutiny, revisions and professional assessment from independent parties. Importantly, it's been recommended for approval by your planning officers who conclude that it complies with the Brentwood Local Plan and the National Planning Policy Framework, and that causes no material planning harm to any adjacent property. Members will recall that previous committee decisions were to defer for a site visit specifically to better understand concerns around daylight, sunlight and the overbearing impact, particularly in relation to number 70, who made a speech at the last planning committee along with the parish council. That site visit has now taken place and additional sunlight and daylight diagrams have been submitted in response to members' requests. Those studies have confirmed what the officer's report has already stated. The proposal does not result in material loss of daylight or sunlight and does not create an unacceptable sense of enclosure and does not harm the living conditions of number 70 or any other neighbouring property. This scheme has also been amended during the process to address neighbouring both planning concerns and also from neighbouring properties. The rear extension was reduced in depth, the roof form was revised to a hip design to reduce the visual mass, boundary treatments have been confirmed to be retained, and no flank windows are proposed, protecting the privacy of number 70. These are not the actions of an overdevelopment, but of a responsive and proportionate design taking consideration to the neighbouring property of number 70. We're also aware that this application has been discussed on several occasions by the Donninghurst Parish Council and has been widely talked about locally. However, it is worth noting that many other similar planning applications within the local proximity are regularly discussed with the Parish Council and are often noted and dismissed without comment or further discussion. This level of repeated focus on a single application is therefore unusual and should not in itself be taken as an indication of planning harm. Ultimately, each application must be assessed on its own planning merits and not on the volume of persistent discussions surrounding it. It is important to note that this is not a contentious site overall. There are no objections from statutory consultees, no highways objections, no drainage objections, and no objections from the planning officers themselves. 2 neighbours support the scheme. The remaining objections all come from 1 neighbouring household, despite repeated professional assessments to conclude there is no material harm to satisfy number 70. While these concerns are understood, plan decisions must be based on subjective plan evidence and not on continued objections alone. The officer's report is clear that the impacts raised do not reach the threshold required to justify a refusal, and that the proposal would not be acceptable even without personal circumstances being taken into consideration. If, in design terms, the proposal is well proportionate, subordinate to the host dwelling, and uses appropriate materials that reflects the development pattern already represented along Pear Tree Lane, where similar extensions and dormers have already been approved. In summary to my points, members have now had a site visit, an officer's recommendation for approval, a daylight and sunlight evidence confirming no material harm following the last committee meeting, which is over and above this type of application, a scheme that complies with policy and protects the neighbour's amenity. On that basis, I respectfully ask the members to support your planning officer's decision and put its application forward for approval.
Thank you, Mr Davis. Right, so of the ward councillors, we have Councillor McShane, who's on the committee. So, Councillor McShane, you can speak first.
Thank you. Yes, well, I have to agree with everything that Councillor Dicker has said, actually. This is basically overdevelopment of the back garden. We've got literally a house at the end. We've taken away although they say I haven't taken away the sun from the other resident, there's no room to get anything down there. I don't know how they're going to build it because it's literally that wide. I just have to, I must admit, I can't support this.
Are you moving for refusal, or are you just...
I'll listen to what other people have got to say.
Very well, that's fine. Yep. Right. Do we have anybody else who's in? Councillor Baldwin.
Yeah, just to say, I went on a site visit, and obviously not everyone did, so I just want to express that my impression was that visualising where the first floor extension will come to is not only 2 metres longer, it'll also be coming to like a metre closer to number 70 as well. And as I stood in the garden and visualised where the end of the property would be, to me, it did seem to be really overbearing. I appreciate it's been reduced by a metre. I can, to imagine that as well would have been even worse. But I still think it's overbearing personally.
Thank you, Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I thank you and the officers for arranging the site visit. It's always useful to see the site in a case like this, which is quite contentious, and you get very polarised views. A couple of questions, if I may. Obviously, we don't have sight of the personal circumstances, but can I just first of all check that officers confirm that there were substantial personal circumstances which they have evidenced as part of the decision-making process tonight, so that without knowing the detail of it, we know that officers have been made aware of the detail and they're happy that it's significant?
I believe you were emailed just before the previous committee with the details.
And you're happy that
Yep.
is a relevant?
Can I share that?
Okay, Councillor Barbier, you all received an email that was actually from the applicant's agent that does say it's confidential. So I can understand that you're actually discussing what was the content of that email. I have spoken to the agent and he said the applicant was okay for it to be discussed, but I am mindful that this is in a public session. So I think if you just want to ask the question and you said you've considered that, the officers considered that, I think you'll be happy with that conclusion.
So then I'll make a couple of other points. In terms of, obviously, I hear what both sides have said, and I know there are no overlooking windows, but the comment on page 97, further soft and hard boundary treatment to be retained, we've obviously heard just now that may not be the case. Is that something which could be conditioned and would be an enforceable condition in planning law?
Who wants to come in?
That's fine. So the So the intention is to retain the hedge and the existing hard boundary. Occasionally during construction, it may be a case that could be, it may have to be removed, but you could condition it to say that something has to be replaced there, or a landscaping condition could be imposed to say something. If the hedge had to be removed at a later date, something else would be replacing that by condition.
So what I would say is that should this application be approved, I would request that officers go away and include that as a enforceable condition. And let's just assume that the hedge may have been taken out in places already, so reinstated to the same and similar height as today. Yeah, to maintain the spirit of that commitment, because it does say are shown to be retained, and what we may expect and what we can insist upon might be two different things without the condition in place. It is a fine balancing act because it is going to impact the neighbours for sure, but in planning terms it does seem to meet most of the requirements.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Chair. I guess that something that members of the public may not get is that we always have to come from the assumption that we're going to approve something and find reasons where it's policy compliant, but it's not policy compliant for a reason for refusal. I haven't heard any policies that this is against. So I think it's compliant, and therefore we have to move to approve it, and therefore I move for approval. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder for that motion for approval? Councillor Rigby, do you want to speak now, Councillor Rigby? Okay. Do we have anybody else? I would say a couple of things myself. Do we have anybody else who wants to speak? Councillor Rigby, we can come back to, obviously. No, not at the moment. So my point is I'm hearing the neighbour, and I have sympathy for the neighbour. I'm also listening to the parish council, and I have the parish council obviously know their own areas and they have their own concerns, and those are very important. We should be taking them into account. I am quite struck by the fact that the three parish council reasons for objection, one of them was involved shortening the rear extension by a few metres and having hipped roof. Now, so obviously there was a shortening from previous versions of this, albeit maybe only by a metre, and there was a hipped roof put on it. Another one of those objections was to request a planning condition which restricted third-party occupancy, so it could only be used by a family member and not rented out or sold. And that planning condition is reflected on page 99. It's condition 3. It's specifically being said that the part of the single dwelling house shown in the approved drawings as Burncastle shall not be occupied as a separate dwelling, which is picking up on that. So of those two, 3 of them have effectively been picked up in some of the changes that have been made. You could argue that the shortening of the rear extension hasn't been shortened enough, but they have, as the applicant said, the applicant has listened to the concerns which have been raised, and there have been changes to the original version of the scheme which reflect the concerns which have been raised. We've also got the point about the obscure glazed window or the obscure glazing on the side. So I think I'm seeing that and I'm hearing that, and I think those are positives. As I say, I have sympathy for the neighbour. I'm also somewhat conscious. I mean, obviously, I was happy to bring it to committee, and I think this is a very good example of the value of site visits, because we obviously discovered on the site visit that the site effectively wasn't as it looked in the original application. The boundary of the site was somewhat different. That's reflected. It was a very useful site visit. It was useful to see. It was good that there were people there, and I think it demonstrates the value of site visits. So I think it was a good idea to do that. It was a good idea to defer. Personally, although I have sympathy with the neighbour, I am in favour of the proposal that's been made, which is the motion which has been made for approval. I think that's reasonable. I don't think we've heard strong arguments against, which would stand up. Do we have anybody other than Councillor McShane?
Enforcement then, if this does go through, will somebody be about in 6 months' time or whenever it's built? There is no time scale there, I notice, on when the start date is. It's normal 3 years, is it? Yeah. You know, the hedge is retained, and I'm a bit worried about the separate dwelling at the back garden. You know, how are you going to enforce that? You know, you've got to have someone come round in some time to have a look.
Yes, so thanks for that point. So the point that Councillor Barber made in terms of the reinstatement of the hedge, in terms of the conditions which are in the printed version of the agenda, we don't have a condition in terms of that reinstatement. There's this sort of tacit expectation. I certainly would, I think it would be better if we could actually put in a condition which says that the hedge should be reinstated, or whether it's been taken away or not. If it needed to be taken away as a result of building work, it would need to be reinstated to the conditions that it was beforehand. So I don't think that's complex. I think if other members are happy with that, and if the movers and seconders of the motion are happy with that, I'm seeing nods. Right. So, does anybody else want to speak? We can go to the vote. Councillor Rigby, do you want to say anything? You can.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Such applications as this are the meat and drink of planning committees up and down the land, including this one. And I acknowledge what both sides have said and the emotions and force with which they've said it, as well as the reasons. And it's important to give acknowledgement to that, because we as their councillors must listen to them fairly and equally. And that's something which I hope the planning system will always continue to reflect in its deliberations, even though we face great changes legislatively and elsewhere as to the planning system, which are not, I would imagine, are things that most members of this committee would wish to have occurred upon us. But leaving that to one side, as Councillor Minot says, some of the objections raised by the Parish Council have been dealt with by way of condition. I thought the officer's report went into quite some detail about how the sunlight issue was dealt with, how there has been a pattern of visits, the site visit, which I agree with Councillor Minor is really important in that instance. Councillor Barber's contribution, as ever, was very helpful, and I think that must be taken into account, just as Councillor McShane's comment on this, the family member aspect was important. We do have a motion for approval. I have seconded it, and I would urge members to support Councillor Barrett and myself.
So do we have anybody else who wants to speak on this before we go to the vote? No. Right. So we have a motion which has been seconded for approval in accordance with the officer's recommendation, and we'll go to the vote. And with the condition that's been mentioned on reinstatement of the hedge. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Would members please indicate for or against the motion when their name is called? Councillor Minot.
For.
Councillor M. Cuthbert.
For.
Councillor Baldock.
Against.
Councillor Barber.
For.
Councillor Dr. Barrett.
For.
Councillor N. Cuthbert. For. Councillor Gelderbloom. For. Councillor Gorton. For. Councillor Mayo. For. Councillor McShane.
Against.
Councillor Patel.
For.
Councillor Quirk.
For.
Councillor Rigby.
For.
Thank you. The motion to approve is carried.
Thank you for that. That brings us to the end of our second item. We don't have any urgent items, so the meeting is closed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chair.